HOA bulldozed my backyard path, claims it was unsafe, but I had proof they lied. My name's Robert, and I've lived in the Oakridge Heights community for the past 8 years. It's a nice enough neighborhood with well-maintained houses and friendly neighbors, at least most of them. When I first moved in, I knew there was an HOA, but they seemed reasonable enough. I paid my dues on time, kept my lawn mowed, and never had any issues. That all changed when Barbara Peterson became the new HOA president 3 years ago. I'm an avid gardener, and my backyard has always been my sanctuary. 2 years ago, I decided to create a beautiful winding garden path that would connect my back porch to a small meditation area I'd set up under an old oak tree. I spent months planning it out, researching materials, and making sure everything was up to code. I used high-quality pavers, installed proper drainage, and even added subtle solar-powered lighting along the edges. The path was about 40 feet long, gently curved through my garden beds, and was completely contained within my property lines. Before starting the project, I did everything by the book. I submitted detailed plans to the HOA's Architectural Review Committee, including specifications for materials, dimensions, and drainage plans. They approved it unanimously, and I still have the approval letter dated March 15, 2023, with Barbara's own signature on it. I spent nearly $6,000 on materials, and another $2,000 on professional installation helped to make sure everything was perfect. The path was completed in May 2023, and for 6 months, everything was fine. Neighbors would compliment me on how beautiful it looked, and some even asked for the contractor's information to do something similar in their yards. But then came the November HOA meeting, where everything started to go sideways. Barbara had apparently decided that my path was an eyesore and a safety hazard. During the meeting, she dramatically declared, "We've received multiple complaints about Mr. Jackson's unauthorized backyard modifications. The lighting is too bright, the path is uneven, and it's creating drainage issues for neighboring properties." I was floored. Not only were these accusations completely false, but I had written approval for everything. I stood up right there in the meeting and said, "Barbara, you personally signed off on these plans. I have all the documentation, and there haven't been any modifications from what was approved." She just gave me this condescending smile and replied, "The board has reassessed the situation and determined it doesn't meet our community standards. You have 30 days to remove it." I tried to reason with them, pointing out that I had followed every rule and regulation. I even offered to have an independent inspector evaluate the path to prove it was safe and properly constructed. But Barbara and her 2 closest allies on the board, Karen Martinez and Tom Wilson, weren't interested in facts or compromise. The next few weeks were a nightmare of certified letters and increasingly hostile interactions. They started fining me $100 per day for non-compliance. I responded with copies of my approval documents and photos showing that everything was exactly as approved. They ignored everything. Then, on December 15th, while I was at work, I got a frantic call from my neighbor, Sarah. "Robert, there's a bulldozer in your backyard. The HOA is tearing up your path." I rushed home to find my beautiful garden path completely destroyed. The pavers were scattered everywhere, my garden beds were torn up, and even some of my plants had been damaged. Barbara was standing there with a smug look on her face, waving some document she claimed gave them the right to abate the hazard. I was devastated but also furious. That's when I decided to fight back. I immediately started documenting everything, taking photos and videos of the destruction, gathering all my previous correspondence, and collecting statements from neighbors who witnessed the demolition. But here's where it gets interesting. Remember Sarah, my neighbor who called me? She's a paralegal at a law firm specializing in property disputes. When she saw what happened, she was livid and offered to help me build my case. Together, we started digging into the HOA's records, which they're legally required to make available to homeowners. What we found was shocking. Through a series of emails we uncovered through proper legal channels, we discovered that Barbara and her friends on the board had a side business selling landscaping services to homeowners in the community. They had been pressuring people to remove their personal landscaping improvements and then conveniently offering their services as the approved solution. Even more damning, we found messages between Barbara and Karen discussing how they could force me to remove my path so they could sell me their standard-approved design for nearly triple what I had paid. There was even a message where Barbara admitted knowing my path was properly approved but claimed they could reinterpret the guidelines however they wanted. With Sarah's help, I found an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, James Rodriguez. When he saw the evidence we'd gathered, he couldn't believe how blatant their abuse of power was. This is one of the clearest cases of HOA overreach and self-dealing I've ever seen, he told me. We filed a lawsuit against the HOA and specifically named Barbara, Karen, and Tom as defendants. The complaint included charges of breach of contract, abuse of power, illegal destruction of property, and fraud. We also reported their side business scheme to the State Attorney General's office, as it violated multiple state laws regarding HOA board member conduct. The HOA's lawyer initially tried to brush us off with a lowball settlement offer of $5,000, claiming they had acted within their rights. But when we presented our evidence, including the emails about their landscaping scheme, their tone changed dramatically. The legal process was frustrating and took several months, but watching Barbara and her cronies squirm during depositions made it worth it. When asked about the emails discussing their plan to force me to use their services, Barbara tried to claim they were taken out of context. But it's hard to explain away an email that literally says, once we force him to tear it out, we can make him pay premium for the approved design. The case never made it to trial. Once their insurance company saw the evidence, they pushed for a settlement. But I wasn't interested in just money. I wanted systemic change to protect other homeowners from similar abuse. In the end, we reached a settlement that included $25,000 in compensation for the destruction of my path and garden, a requirement for the entire board to resign, new HOA bylaws requiring multiple bids for any community services, a prohibition on board members having any financial interest in services provided to the community, mandatory annual training for new board members on their legal obligations, my attorney's fees paid in full. But the best part? The State Attorney General's office launched an investigation into Barbara and Karen's landscaping business. They found a pattern of similar behavior in other communities where they had board positions. Both are now facing civil penalties and have been barred from serving on any HOA boards in the state. The new board, elected in March 2024, is much more reasonable. They've already approved my plans to rebuild my garden path exactly as it was before, and have implemented new transparency measures to prevent similar abuses of power. Sarah, who helped me uncover all this, is now working with a state representative to draft legislation requiring more oversight of HOA boards and better protections for homeowners. She's asked me to testify about my experience when the bill comes up for consideration. As for Barbara, last I heard she's trying to sell her house and move out of the community. Turns out it's not so fun living here when you can't boss everyone around anymore. Karen and Tom already sold their homes and left, unable to face their neighbors after everything came out. I'm almost done rebuilding my garden path now, and it's even better than before. This time, I've added a small bench halfway along it with a plaque that reads, "Never let bullies win." It's become something of a symbol in our community, a reminder that standing up for what's right might be hard, but it's always worth it. The whole experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, always keep detailed records of everything, especially when dealing with HOAs. Second, know your rights and don't be afraid to fight for them. And third, sometimes the best revenge is simply exposing the truth and letting justice take its course. My story has actually inspired several of my neighbors to become more involved in community governance. We now have regular informal meetings where homeowners can discuss concerns before they become problems, and the new board has created a transparent process for reviewing architectural requests. Looking back, while I wouldn't want to go through it all again, I'm proud that I stood up to the bullies and helped make positive changes in our community. My garden path is more than just a walkway now. It's a testament to standing up for what's right and not letting corrupt people abuse their power. The funny thing is, this whole ordeal has actually brought our community closer together. Neighbors who never spoke before now stop to chat while walking their dogs or working in their yards. We've even started a community garden club, and yes, we made sure to get proper HOA approval for everything. As I sit on my new bench, watching the sunset through the oak trees and enjoying the gentle solar lights along my rebuilt path, I can't help but feel grateful. Not for the ordeal itself, but for the reminder that one person standing up against injustice can make a real difference. And every time I walk this path, I remember that sometimes the most beautiful things in life are worth fighting for. You know what the real irony is? Barbara's crusade to get rid of my path ended up costing her everything: her position, her business, her reputation, and ultimately her place in the community. Meanwhile, my path is not only back, but has become a symbol of positive change in our neighborhood. I still get emails and messages from people in other communities dealing with similar HOA issues, asking for advice. My story even got picked up by a local news station, which did a series on HOA oversight and accountability. It's amazing how one small garden path could lead to such big changes. The new HOA president, Lisa Chen, is everything Barbara wasn't: transparent, fair, and actually interested in improving the community rather than controlling it. She's implemented a new system where all architectural reviews are done by a rotating committee of homeowners, preventing any single person or small group from having too much power. As for me, I've learned that sometimes fighting for what's right isn't just about winning, it's about making sure the same thing doesn't happen to others. The path in my backyard isn't just my victory, it's a victory for everyone who's ever felt powerless against arbitrary authority. And you know what? The solar lights along my path aren't too bright at all. They're just bright enough to light the way forward, both literally and figuratively, for our community's future. Update: 6 months later. A lot has happened since I last wrote about my battle with the HOA, and I thought you might want to hear how everything turned out. Trust me, it gets even better. Remember that legislation Sarah was working on with the state representative? Well, it passed. The Homeowner Protection and HOA Accountability Act went into effect last month. They actually named one of the key provisions after my case. The Jackson Rule requires HOAs to maintain detailed records of all board decisions and makes it illegal for board members to have any financial interest in services they recommend or require homeowners to use. But here's where it gets really interesting. About 2 months ago, I got a call from an investigator with the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. Turns out Barbara and Karen's landscaping scheme wasn't just limited to our community. They had been running this racket across 3 different states, using their positions on various HOA boards to funnel hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of contracts to their company and other businesses they had interests in. Mr. Jackson, the FBI agent told me, your case was the thread that started unraveling their whole operation. We've been building a case against them for wire fraud and racketeering. I spent a full day being interviewed by the FBI, sharing every email, document, and piece of evidence we had gathered during our civil case. Sarah came with me as a witness, and her documentation skills proved invaluable. The agents were particularly interested in the financial records we had uncovered, showing how Barbara and Karen had been moving money between different shell companies to hide their scheme. Last week, Barbara and Karen were both arrested. The news made the front page of our local paper and even got picked up by some national outlets. Turns out they had stolen over $750,000 from various homeowners and communities over the past 5 years. Tom, the other former board member, had already agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for leniency, which is how they got a lot of the additional evidence they needed. The day after the arrests, I found a letter in my mailbox from Barbara's lawyer. It was a formal apology, part of her attempt to show remorse before her sentencing. But you know what? I didn't even open it. I don't need her apology. The justice system working as it should is all the satisfaction I need. Our community has completely transformed since all this happened. Lisa, our new HOA president, has implemented so many positive changes. We now have quarterly town halls where homeowners can voice concerns and suggest improvements. All board meetings are recorded and live-streamed, and every financial decision over $1,000 requires competitive bidding and full disclosure of any potential conflicts of interest. Remember that community garden club I mentioned? It's grown into something amazing. We now have a beautiful community garden space where families can rent plots for $20 a year. We even started a program with the local elementary school to teach kids about gardening and sustainability. And yes, my garden path design has become something of a template. The HOA has approved similar paths for 5 other homes in the community. Sarah's legal career has taken off too. After our case got attention, she was promoted to lead paralegal at her firm and is now handling their HOA and property rights division. She's been invited to speak at several legal conferences about how to investigate HOA fraud and abuse of power. But the biggest surprise came last month. A class action lawsuit was filed against Barbara and Karen's company on behalf of all the homeowners they had defrauded over the years. The lawyer handling the case reached out to me to be the lead plaintiff, and of course I agreed. Initial estimates suggest they may have overcharged homeowners by more than $1.2 million through their various schemes. I also got an unexpected call from a publishing company. They want me to write a book about my experience and include advice for other homeowners dealing with HOA issues. I'm working with a ghostwriter now, and we're calling it Standing Your Ground: One Homeowner's Fight Against HOA Corruption. It should be out next year. The support from the community has been overwhelming. Last weekend, we had a neighborhood barbecue in the common area, and so many people came up to thank me for standing up to Barbara and her cronies. One elderly couple told me they had been intimidated into paying thousands for unnecessary landscaping work, but now they're part of the class action lawsuit and finally feel like they're getting justice. The FBI investigation has also revealed some interesting connections. Apparently, Barbara and Karen had been running HOA consulting seminars in other states, essentially teaching other corrupt board members how to manipulate their positions for profit. The federal prosecutor told me they've now opened investigations into several other HOA boards across the country. As for my garden path, it's become something of a local landmark. A reporter from HGTV even came out to do a story about it for a special they're doing on homeowner rights and property improvements. They interviewed me walking along the path, talking about the importance of standing up for what's right and knowing your rights as a homeowner. The Never Let Bullies Win bench has become a favorite spot for neighbors to sit and chat. Last week, an older gentleman stopped me and said, "You know, I've lived here for 20 years, and this is the first time it's felt like a real community instead of just a bunch of houses with rules." The State Attorney General's office has used our case to create a new HOA oversight division. They've set up a hotline for homeowners to report suspicious behavior by HOA boards, and they've already received hundreds of calls. They've asked me to serve on an advisory committee to help develop better regulations and enforcement mechanisms. Lisa, our new HOA president, has been amazing through all of this. She's implemented a mentorship program where experienced homeowners help new residents understand their rights and responsibilities. We now have a monthly newsletter that includes detailed financial reports and updates on all board decisions. Transparency has become our community's watchword. The most satisfying part? Barbara and Karen's houses both sold for well below market value. Nobody wanted to buy from them once the story got out. The new owners are wonderful people who have already become active in our community activities. One of them even joined our garden club. Tom, who turned state's evidence, moved to another state, but not before providing a full written confession about how the scheme worked. His testimony is going to be crucial in making sure Barbara and Karen serve serious time for their crimes. The FBI agent in charge of the case told me something interesting last week. He said that HOA fraud is becoming one of the fastest-growing white-collar crimes in the country, but most people are too intimidated to fight back. Your case, he said, is going to be a template for how to investigate and prosecute these crimes. I've started mentoring other homeowners who are dealing with similar situations. Every Sunday, I host a small group in my backyard. We sit along the path that started it all, sharing stories and strategies for dealing with HOA issues. It's empowering to help others stand up for their rights. The legal system worked exactly as it should in this case. Barbara and Karen are facing up to 20 years in federal prison for their schemes. Their assets have been frozen, and they'll likely have to pay back everything they stole, plus penalties. The prosecutor told me she's pushing for the maximum sentence to send a message to other corrupt HOA boards. But you know what makes me proudest? We didn't just win a legal battle. We changed things for the better. Our community is stronger, more united, and more transparent than ever. People aren't afraid to speak up when they see something wrong, and the board actually listens and responds to concerns. Yesterday, I was walking my path as the sun was setting, and I realized something. This whole ordeal wasn't just about a garden path or even about standing up to corrupt bullies. It was about showing that regular people can fight back against abuse of power and win. It was about proving that the system can work if you're willing to stand your ground and fight for what's right. The path lights still shine every evening, but now they illuminate more than just my garden. They light the way toward a better, more just community. And that's worth every bit of the fight it took to get here.